Okay, we've covered a lot, so I think it's time to do a little review. And I'm calling this an exchangeability review because most of what we've covered thus far has been due to or has been about exchangeability. Exchangeability, if we remember, was our most important causal inference hypothesis. It basically said that we could take association and assume that it's causation under exchangeability. So take something that is fundamentally measurable, association, and equate it to something that is fundamentally unmeasurable, causation. So this was super useful. We noted there were two violations of exchangeability that happened. One we called confounding. Confounding is the common name for this. We had a different name though, if you would remember. So I'll give you 1 second to remember while I write the rest of this out. I'll actually go ahead and give you a really big hint here. So we can go ahead and have some measured variable, and it would have to affect both A and Y. And so our second name for confounding was common effects. Confounding is basically an example of a common effect situation in a causal diagram. Now we had a solution to confounding as well. Do you remember what our solution was? Our solution was simply to condition. If we were able to condition the common effects away, we would be able to, condition. If we were able to condition the common effects away, we would be able to assume exogeneity within our treatment variable. So we could assume that A, our treatment, is as good as if it were assumed or if it were assigned randomly. Okay, so that's confounding. So we could eliminate this sort of association through this backdoor with conditioning. We had one more type of way that exchangeability could be violated. This was through selection bias. Selection bias. So some people might use confounding and selection bias in slightly different ways. I do want to note that here. That being said, I really do like this way of relating selection bias and confounding because it gives us something that we can easily latch onto in causal diagrams. Because at least these causal diagrams, I think, make the most sense to me. So do you remember what our second name for selection bias was? It was conditioning upon common effects. So we have some common effect C. This might be death or being a worker at a factory, or it might be following up. And conditioning upon it, so we're basically saying, hey, we can't measure these people if they don't follow up, or we can't measure them if they die. So this is conditioning upon common effects. Selection bias had two solutions. Solution number one was as well conditioning. Sometimes we could condition on specific measured variables, or we can measure and then condition on variables in our causal diagram to eliminate selection bias. And then the second thing is we can sometimes assume more. So assume more. If we make further assumptions on C, specifically that C is exchangeable, it has exchangeability, it has positivity, and it also has sattva, so it has these three assumptions, as well as no measurement error. We can go ahead and we can actually assume away or use simple standardization to deal with selection bias. Again, the problem here is that we need to make more assumptions. So these are the simplest ways to deal with these two problems, and these are the simplest ways to detect them. Later on in an advanced causal inference class that I'll be giving afterwards, I'll talk about more sophisticated ways to detect them other than doing expert causal inference diagrams. And I'll talk about more sophisticated ways to solve for them. That being said, this is an ongoing area of research, so do bear with me. Okay, so that is exchangeability. We're going to move on to something almost equally important, and that is the parametric G formula.